All right, back again. And so male condoms are kind of in the middle. Diaphragms can become displaced. Male condoms are notorious for failing because of improper use, and you may wonder what that is. I'll tell you really quickly. Tearing the package down the middle, not the side, can create micro tears in the latex, allowing pathogens and sperm to pass through. Second thing is people have to pinch the reservoir end as it's rolled on. If you don't, it'll fill up with air and be already pressurized so that when there's ejaculation and continued thrusting, it can break. And then sometimes people don't check to make sure it's still on. It can slide off. So if you do it if you don't do those things, you got about 80% chance that it's going to be okay, 20% chance it's going to fail. That is to say, 2 out of 10 times it's statistically it's going to fail. And then if you do it the proper way, over 90%, maybe even 95%. Yeah. And then on up the list would include things like the pill, which should be a round yellow pill with a happy face on it, based on what it did for women's ability to take control of their own fertility in the 60s. The patch, the vaginal ring, those are things that trick your body using hormones to think that it is already pregnant, so that it won't create a new person. And then there could be injectables. There could be female sterilization, tying of the tubes, that is, vasectomy and IUD. Those are all at the top, but you still should use a second method. And in all of those cases, other than the male and female condom, use a male or female condom. Because not only is it an additional protection against getting pregnant, those offer you additional pretty good protection against many sexually transmitted infections, but not all. Okay. Let's talk. So, condoms are usually latex, but for people with latex allergies, they do make polypropylene plastic condoms. They're very rough and rugged. They have several sizes of condoms now. They also have textures and flavors. Originally, condoms were made from goat or sheep intestine. You know? Okay. Let's talk about teratogens. And teratogens are substances or processes, and I have expanded this definition of teratogens to include processes and conditions, okay, under which malformations or dysfunction may occur in the developing human. So that's an inclusive definition. It gives me an opportunity to talk about a few other things. And we want to talk about something called a critical period, which we have talked about before in the introductory material, remember? So a critical period is a specific span of time, narrow or wide, depending on the skill you're trying to acquire, during which things must take place and other things should not take place in order for it to be a positive effect on development. So when we're talking about prenatal development, there are specific times when specific organs and parts of the body become rapidly developed. And we don't want things interfering with that. Teratogens are things that interfere with that. And the periods during which those anatomical or process-oriented things take place are called critical periods. They're critical because we don't want bad things to happen. Okay. The first trimester, the first 9 weeks, is the most delicate, vulnerable period for developing human. Okay? Now, I like the term sensitive period because it implies that there is a sensitivity for the development of certain attributes, processes, structures in the developing human, but there is some plasticity, at least in the physical domains, you see. So, all right. So if you look at the colorful chart that is found in virtually every textbook imaginable, you will see various critical periods look at the first one in the dark blue in this PowerPoint and the light blue. The central nervous system has a critical period from 2 weeks all the way to about 20 weeks, which means that interruptions within that critical period can cause various kinds of, potentially anyway, cause various downstream problems. Okay? So if you look at the top of the chart, you have the dividing zygote, implantation, and then you have what's called the embryo at the beginning of the end of the second week. There, see it? And all the way up until the beginning of the 9th week. And you will see that corresponds to the various things that are listed on the chart that have critical periods of development: the heart, the limbs, the eyes, the teeth, and so on. Let me give you an example of teeth. Teeth come in as a critical period because they're developing at that time, almost 7 weeks in, and then at the beginning of the 9th week. So that is their critical period. So let me give you an example of a teratogen. A mom takes tetracycline for an infection. Let's say she doesn't know she's pregnant. Let's say the doctor does not know. The mother does not know. Entirely possible. Then the child will develop gray mottled teeth as a result of that. If you give tetracycline to laboratory mice or rats, the babies turn bright yellow if you give it to them during their critical period. All right, so you see that the susceptibility to teratogens is what we need to pay attention to. The critical periods are the highest period of susceptibility, okay? All right. So the presence of teratogens increases the risk of problems during development. And the risks increase with the dose or amount of teratogen, the significant amount of teratogen, and the duration, how long the teratogen was present during a critical period, and the timing of the exposure. Okay? All right. So let's talk about individual ones. First, alcohol. What we see with alcohol is that in the brain, if a mom drinks to any real degree, particularly to excess during development of the nervous system, then brain cells have a higher risk of becoming very poorly organized. And if they're badly organized enough, it gives rise to all sorts of problems in a newborn, which is fetal alcohol syndrome or fetal alcohol effects. Fetal alcohol syndrome, low birth rate, weight, aggressiveness, impulsivity, facial defects, lower IQ, problems in school, neurobehavioral defects, ADHD. Fetal alcohol effects are somewhat more subtle, usually neurological defects, which would include ADHD and some other things. Lots and lots of inmates, incarcerated people, have FAS or FAE. Lots of them. In fact, if you watch some of these shows on television that depict life in an incarceration facility, you can see some of the facial defects that tell us the person might have FAE or FAS more likely. So let's talk about a few more. Nicotine exposure leads to premature births, low birth weights, fetal death. Yeah. Some cognitive issues, potentially, behavioral abnormalities. Many of these, if the baby makes it through, are corrected with an appropriate environment after birth. But some could persist, particularly in some cognitive issues. Age, so women below the age of 16 and over the age of about 45 see higher risk for low birth weight, miscarriages, stillborn, Down syndrome, neurological defects. You're going to hear the same list, roughly. Caffeine, which is a drug found in lots of things, including the soda that I'm drinking at the moment. More than about 3 cups of brewed coffee can lead to low birth weight rate. At least a risk for that is increased. Miscarriage, stillbirth, yep, it happens. If we talk about narcotics, either illicit or prescribed, Then we're looking at, again, low birth weight, infant mortality risk, irritability, sleep problems, feeding problems, school problems. Babies are addicted at birth to whatever substances the mom has been routinely taking that have an addictive potential. For environmental toxins, we need to say that we don't know all of the effects of environmental toxins. There are tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of them, and most of the time we don't have any testing on any of it. And we don't have any testing typically on the combination of those toxins. It's really an awful, awful thing. And we may discover, or not, but we may discover that in the future that things like autism is triggered. ADHD, which we know in some cases is triggered by pesticides. But we may find a whole host of interacted toxins or single toxins that create problems. For x-rays, we know that there's a sign if you're going to get an x-ray for a potential broken bone or something. If you think you're pregnant, tell them, please, and then they drape you with a lead shield anyway. But if the baby's exposed to the developing baby is exposed to x-rays, then there could be a miscarriage, birth defects, cognitive impairment, depending on dose and timing, obviously. Okay. I guess I want to talk about a few other things and then go to the third part. So, poor maternal nutrition. Luckily, female bodies are set up for, and developing babies are set up for the baby to get most of the goodies at the expense of the mother to a certain point. We can talk about environmental stressors that bathes a woman's system and then the baby in corticosteroids and related stress hormones. That's not good when it's chronic. Drug use by the father can be a problem. Secondhand smoke, tobacco, THC, crack, and meth can have an effect because those things are in the air in the home, if that's where they're being used. But then substances like alcohol, THC, opiates, cocaine, and so forth can damage sperm, so that can enter into the conception end of things. Now, the last thing I want to discuss briefly is what's called a reaction range. So, a reaction range is a range of ability, traits, and skills potentially that are set by genetics with a high end and a low end, and based on what happens to you environmentally, you will either express that at the high end or the low end. You take IQ. IQ is malleable to some extent. The reaction range is set by genetics. So you will potentially have an upper limit and a lower limit. And barring any potential catastrophes, the lower limit will not be exceeded, okay, downward. But then the environment kicks in. An enriched environment, a stimulating environment, begins to push that outcome of IQ, or intelligence quotient, a complex series of skills that are measured to produce one number. The one number means less than looking at the individual parts of that test, that series of tests. But it will begin to push it up that reaction range toward the maximum amount. Okay? That's a reaction range. When I come back to you with part 3, we'll talk about genotype environment interaction. See you in a minute.